All right, welcome to a pedal demo of the SoloDallas Storm, a very interesting pedal that I think has maybe some folks kind of scratching their head as to, like, where do I position this? Where in the chain should it go? How should I dial it? I think the addition of the limiter is probably what kind of throws people for a loop the most. Not in a bad way, just in like it's so different having a limiter on a drive pedal that it gives you a lot of options where you can run it and what qualities it brings out. So we'll kind of mess around with a few of those and see what all it can do. But generally, first, we'll kind of see what it sounds like as like a sort of boost, sort of drive pedal. What I'm using is my Veritas Portlander that has Lindy Fralin PAFs. And the first thing that it's going to in my chain, and there's only a couple things, it is the Pinstripe multi-buffer. It's the output 2 that's running the Jensen transformer side, and then a tone press compressor. So pretty simple, and I'm just using my little RJM Mastermind looper to, turn on and off the Storm here. So here is clean tone. It's a JMI amp on the left, which is kind of like an AC30, and then a Fender Prosonic on the right. So here is clean tone. And then here is the Storm. So as you can see, I've kind of got all the knobs pointing to like 2 o'clock or so. So we'll kind of back some things off and just see what the pedal actually sounds like by itself. So let me start with pulling the limiter all the way down, and then let's kind of see what drive qualities we can get. So I would say that's the Storm in its most simplest form. Like, that's the amount of drive it supplies. So you hear that little bit of flutter and grit. So there's still something going on under the hood. It's just subtle, but it has a lot of like boost gain on tap. Just like clean volume, and the way that kind of interacts with your amp with that bit of its like kind of fluttery, gritty effect is really cool. So, is this a drive? Is this a boost? I guess it just kind of depends on how you use it, how you work that limiter. But anyways, let's kind of see what it sounds like when we start to inch up the boost with the gain maxed out. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, it's like a really unique texture. It's pretty like fluffy and warm, but it's not losing like any articulation or anything. By all means, you'd kind of want something like that for a boost, so that as you really start to push the amps, it doesn't get super out of control and overly bright. So, I mean, that I think in many ways is pretty balanced. So let's actually work that limiter in there and see what that sounds like. So, you might be able to argue that it's just kind of pulling the volume down. It's creating a hard ceiling more than anything. So what's cool about it, you can kind of really crank the pedal and turn up that limiter, and it pumps everything into this limiter, giving you a big squish. And so it's almost like adding another compressor, sort of, but not quite. And so by forcing all this information into that limited ceiling, you can kind of get some unique textures and qualities, especially when you pair it with another drive. So here's off, and then on. So though it might not be necessarily adding a ton of aggressive qualities, it's really lifting it and smashing it into that limiter. Very cool. So now that's a pretty simple look at it and what it actually sounds like. And, like, let's actually just really quick before we move on, just max everything out. A little woofy in some ways, but still really full and really cool sounding. And we'll combine it with a drive and see what it does with kind of aggressive settings like that. So a big thing is actually position in terms of, is it before the drive, is it after the drive? I'll give a quick example. Right now it's actually positioned early in my chain. And so it's before all of my drives, and that kind of adds a unique effect. So if here is my first gain stage, just kind of lightly EQing the guitar, adding a little bit of a snap, a little bit of a subtle grit. And then if here's the storm by itself, now we add those two together. Once again, first gain stage by itself, storm by itself, and together. Very cool. There's like this nice little bit of control, and I think the way that the limiter is actually, since it's before the drive, it's kind of pushing some of that controlled guitar attack into the first gain stage drive pedal. So nothing's getting like out of hand. It keeps things under control, but it still feels really big, kind of pushing some of those warmer qualities into the first gain stage. So let's do that same thing. I've got the daily driver as a second gain stage here, and something that's just a little bigger, a little more aggressive. And then if we add the storm to it, very cool, very punchy, with plenty of texture. So let's actually, if I were to use instead and do like some palm mutes like that with the like my germanium boost or something instead. And then the storm instead. The germanium boost. Storm. That's the thing I'm really interested in. So what happened there is that limiter, it's squeezing so much more gain and volume boost information into that limiter. The limiter's keeping it under control while being able to actually push a ton of volume, but it just like hard caps it. The daily driver with the storm instead, it's getting kind of like these really forward palm mute sounds, but if I dig into it, really hard compared to digging into the daily driver with like a germanium boost instead, they kind of reach the same volume points basically. Now the germanium. Back to storm. So, using that limiter, we can kind of get it to achieve a similar point of, volume with boost, yet we can kind of pump more into it. So it's like the light articulate stuff is that much more forward and has all this interesting texture and grit and everything. Now, it's a very different experience if I position it after a drive. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so I used my Mastermind PBC6X from RJM to just change the order of the loop, which is super handy. So now the storm is after both my first and second gain stage. And the reaction is basically just so different because you're basically now taking the drives and you're pushing them as well into that limiter. So it kind of caps out your dynamics a little bit more, a little quicker. It's pumping more information into that limiter quicker. And so because of that, you can kind of get all the like drive qualities from your drives, but you can really control how aggressive they sound. They just have, more control. So here's the daily. In the Storm. So before, it was actually getting a lot louder and a lot more aggressive. Turn off Storm. And Storm on. So you almost don't hear the volume change by adding the Storm. But so the question is it actually doing anything? Well, let's play lightly instead. So here's just daily. And then Storm. So I play lightly, Storm off. But if I turn off the Storm, so daily's just on and I dig in really hard, and then I turn the Storm on, it gets just a little more aggressive, but the volume stays the same. So that's kind of my point, is now I can add even more full information when playing lightly when the Storm is after, but kind of keep my volume under control. It's just a different way of thinking. So if I add some like wet effects here, I'll do like a general tape delay and like a nice big cloud to kind of give you an idea of the differences of, the forward aggression of having it before or the kind of gentle approach of having it after. And we're just going to pull the boost volume down just a little bit. All right, so here's just daily by itself. And then if we put the Storm on with it. Storm off. Storm back on. Cool. It sounds great. I love the way that it fills things in to have a little bit more meat and size without getting overly aggressive because it's controlling the volume. Now, with the daily and Storm on in this order, if I really dig into it, versus if I change the order and do that instead. So we get more volume out of the amps because there isn't as much information, pushing that limiter in the Storm, since the Storm is now before the drives. So to me, that is, I feel like, just as important of a feature to highlight as just showing what the pedal itself sounds like, because that's why, to me, there's so much more than meets the eye with the Storm. It's delicate balance with other drives as well. I would say safely, you could categorize this more in the boost territory than a drive. Not that it was ever even trying to call itself a drive. It's just, that would probably be the best way to categorize it. But with, a unique set of diverse tools using that limiter. So I think the last thing I'm curious about is, can I get it to, as a solo pedal, can I get it to be like a cool kind of clean lift if I max out that limiter? Let's see. Oh, absolutely. Sweet. So, it was just maxing out the limiter, maxing out the gain, since the gain is really the only thing adding a unique, subtle drive character. And it's not even out of hand. It's really controlled. It's forcing into that heavy limiting. We get a serious snap that's really cool. Let's add some wet effects to that, because that sounds awesome. All right, here we go. I'm even getting some like really nice harmonic content as well. I think because of how much it's squeezing the guitar and I'm playing so gently. What an interesting snap. So I actually have a secondary side on my compressor that I can, instantly swap to a really compressed setting on my tone press. So let's actually compare those two together. So once again, here is the Storm. And then here's my super compressed side of the tone press. Now let's try both together. Now let's turn the tone press back to normal settings. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I am more interested right now in what the Schaffer Storm is giving me as a super compressed setting more than my tone press, because I'm getting more articulation out of the top end and like a really cool subtle saturation out of it. So I would say hats off to SoloDallas with this pedal. That, once again, very unique. You have to approach it from many different angles. I guess as a final thing, let's see what happens if I throw on like my first gain stage, which once again is a very subtle drive. Here it is. And then if here's Storm by itself, and then here's both. So when we really dig into it, I'm noticing some different things as well. Let's turn the Storm off. And back on. Now let's try the daily. And let's turn just daily on. Storm. Cool, so what we're getting here, since the Storm is first in the chain now, it's not heavily squashing the daily, but we're getting a really cool heavily squashed sound by having it dialed the way it is. So it's still bringing out bigger elements when they're stacked together. It's not choking it, but it's still kind of keeping things under control. I think there's just a really cool relationship to be had with any one of your drives and what the Storm can do with all of this diversity. So I'm sure we could probably continue to dive into like countless other combinations, but as a whole, as a solo pedal, this is the SoloDallas Storm.